I'm very loud anyway, loud and clear, so sorry about that. First, to your points that comments leading up to the writing, what you just talked about. I've been saying this on the book tour, and I finally told my mother-in-law this. My husband actually asked my mother-in-law, said, "What did you think of the book?" And she doesn't have, I think, a large, neither does my mother, a concept of what an artist's life is really like, even though I've always been an artist since I was 5, and yet somehow they don't get it. So, and my husband, a jazz musician, the same, just somehow. Anyway, so my mother-in-law says to Vince, she says, "You know, I read some of the essays, and Vince, I don't want to hurt you or anything," or I didn't say that. She didn't say that exactly, but I'm paraphrasing. She said, "You know, they're just like everybody else. It was a little boring." And I think that's probably true. I mean, we're just like everybody else. There's nothing romantic about being an artist. Zero. I wish people would get it out of their system. I actually like the idea that we are integral into society. If we don't isolate ourselves so much, maybe we'll have more opportunities. That's what I think. So I was refreshed by that, and the fact that a lot of people do different things. As far as the gallery aspect too, gallery is just one part of the equation, part of the puzzle. A gallery, and you can see throughout this whole book that artists still do so much work on their own that dependency is no longer the system that it was any before. And in fact, the mythical ideas of, or the mythology of artists getting stipends and then living off of that money, it's actually, for the most part, artists who got stipends, those were loans against sales. And if they weren't making sales, they were owed that money. So it wasn't that artists were being taken care of entirely, and artists still aren't being taken care of entirely at that high range unless they're bringing in a tremendous amount of money into the gallery. So the partnership is not the illusion that most artists think. Now, that's two ways I'm bursting your bubble, but I guess what I would say is the best part about those two things are that the fact that if we're not romanticized, we are integral into the society, which is better. And then the second part is, if for the galleries, if they are just a partner, then we have more freedom and we have more say. So those two things are very good and not a bad thing. The third thing, what you said about writing, that is absolutely crucial. I think every school should teach artists how to write. I mean, I still struggle with it. The godsend I have is I have a great editor, but also my friends before my husband were my editors. And I think it takes a village for every artist to live a creative life, whether you have somebody helping you with your writing, whether you have somebody helping you frame your work, websites, photography, whatever you can't do well, you're going to be able to find somebody who can do it well, and they're going to want to do it because that's their good skill base. So I think, and there's many ways of getting somebody to do that for you. I know I have a friend of mine who's in the book, I won't name her, but she barters with her doctor in lieu of health insurance. There's creative ways that you can use your gift that you have as an artist to be able to sustain your own life through bartering, through other means of service, to be able to thrive and live. The writing aspect was very important for this book as well. There were some essays from people I did select that I could not read them, and I couldn't have them in there. And that was very, very sad to me, actually, because I love who they are and how they practice, but it had to be where these people had to write well enough that somebody else could understand them. But also, we did not really edit these essays. We barely touched them. I had to sort of wrestle with my publisher. I love my publisher. It wasn't that. It's just that they're used to really editing out a lot and making changes in grammar, making it correct, and I said, I'm not going to do that. So there's a lot of times where maybe it's not understood, but you hear the voice of the artist.
I think that's great because you do have one person who's not a native speaker, and you had someone who's German, right?
Yes.
And you notice it right away that the language is different. And I was glad that it wasn't changed, that the language is there, because you want to hear the voice
Right.
of the artist. There were a couple of things. We were talking about having worked with people to begin with who were very generous. And one thing, I mean, I'm sure people want to talk about the financial aspect of sustaining the creative life. But in terms of the spiritual sustenance, it was very interesting to see a number who all have found continuing in crick groups, having collaborative work, the importance of collaborative work, the idea of, I mean, I think the very first contribution in here, which was Adrian Outlaw, who talks about seed space, the idea of putting together a gallery or a space to bring, when you're not in New York, to bring critics in, to bring curators in to see work. And I found that really exciting. And I think a lot of people here know Michelle Grabner because she shows in San Francisco, and she has been a panelist with the UC Art Alumni Symposium, so she's here. And the Suburban, I mean, we see these examples that are incredibly important. They're important on many levels in terms of they do provide a concrete space for showing work, for an exhibition opportunity. They do provide an opportunity for sales, but that they give a focal point and really create community in that sense. When you're not living in New York, which has been a problem everywhere.
Well, I think I'm just looking at the list of contributors, because if you look at the contributors, Adrian Outlaw, and she is executive director and artist, who she has a little staff, like maybe 3 people now, which is great. I'm proud to be serving on her board. She is phenomenal. She has 2 young children. She's married to someone who has he's a really awesome professor and scientist, but he's not in the visual arts. But then you have other people like Austin Thomas, who also runs a space called Pocket Utopia, who has a young son who's 9 years old and married in New York, and she does that as well. And Michelle Grabner, 2 nonprofit organizations, 3 children, and a husband who is an artist. So it's very interesting how, and I'm just wondering if there's any, I'm looking again, I should know this by the back of my hand, if there's any men that do this in this book. I would say Richard Klein, who is an artist, but he's also the deputy director for, exhibitions coordinator for the Aldrich Museum, which is a non-collecting museum in Richfield. So there are cultural producers in this book that do make things happen to be able to sustain their creative life as an extension of their practice, but also financially good for them.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. I mean, so we're talking about this generosity and this commitment, but in your introduction, you sort of list four points that you want to address and that were motivating you with this book, and with the 4th, you talk about, it ends with, I could quote the whole thing, but community support in a culture that normalizes and encourages competition. And this brings back when you just started speaking about the things that bother you in our art world, really, when we see this. And I would really like to talk about that a little bit. I remember I was a bit shocked when I heard one particular art critic, publisher, now gallerist, talking about the fact that he felt that the reason there had been no mentoring and what we now, career development in the past, in generations past, was essentially, this is the pie, it's so small, I'm not going to divide it up any more than it has to be divided, and that it was holding on, and a very tight kind of jealousy. That's how he saw the generation, which I don't like either. But certainly I think within the culture, we always have to look at where lines are divided between people and how to bridge them.
Well, I think, first of all, I think what I mean when I wrote that was a lot of things. I think that in one way there is no such thing as competition between artists because we're all very, very different than one another. There are very few things, though, offered amongst all of us, but as far as opportunities that are already out there. But there are many, many things that one can do on their own to create their own opportunities. So when you think about that, there is not the small pie that this person was talking about. I was trying to figure out who that was. I'm sure I can probably guess if I keep my thinking cap on. I like the sense, though, of this feeling of competition in the world, meaning that, for example, a sense of ambition and drive that can be very positive. That, like, one reason why I think my husband and I love to work late at night is because, as my husband would say, he loves living in the cracks, and that when I feel like after midnight I'm racing in front of everybody else, the sense of competition is healthy for somebody to, or even to set my own deadlines as a good self-employed business person would. So I think that the impetus for competition within one's being is really good. Within community, I think, is not so good. I do think that where does that line, what you're talking about, where is that line, if you will, or how does one cross that line, or do they? There are many situations where I've given too much of myself to another person. I don't like bottom feeders, or I don't like takers either. I believe artists should exchange, and artists do have cultural capital to give to other artists. And if you don't think you do, look in your studio and start thinking about it.